Hello, children. It's Grandma Carla, and we're going to read some more of The Littles and the Surprise Thanksgiving Guest. And remember, the Littles are little bitty people. Tom, Lucy, and Dinky made their way from the rooftop down to the Littles' apartment through a secret trapdoor shingle. They walked through a maze-like series of passageways that were hidden behind the walls of the old house. The Littles had long ago made their own elevators from soup cans and strings and pulleys in order to get from floor to floor. They knew the spaces behind the walls like they knew the backs of their own hands. They could go from one end of the big house to the other in a matter of minutes. The Littles' apartment was very cozy. They had bedrooms and a very nice living room. The Littles also built a bathroom and a kitchen. The kitchen didn't have much in the way of appliances, but none were really needed. The Littles more often than not ate whatever was left from the Bigs' dinner table. The furniture in the apartment had been cleverly created from household objects and various items that the Bigs had thrown out over the years. The Littles' living room even looked a little bit like the Bigs' living room, as the Littles had borrowed some of the leftover paint and carpet scraps after Mrs. Biggs had finished redecorating her home. As the little children and their cousin got to the door of their family's apartment, Tom pulled on Cousin Dinky's sleeve. "Hey, Cousin Dinky, put your mask back on. Let's throw a scare into everyone for Halloween." Dinky was still a kid at heart and couldn't resist a good practical joke. "What the heck," he said, and he popped on the river rat costume head. Tom Little threw open the door of the apartment. "Hey, everyone, look what Lucy and I found on the roof." Before he could finish the sentence, his uncle, Major Nick Little, had jumped to his feet. In a flash, he pulled a tiny, sharp dagger from his shiny black boot. He hurled it through the air, pinning the left shoulder of Dinky's costume to the door. Lucy let out a loud scream. "Uncle Nick, no! It's just Cousin Dinky!" she cried. Dinky had very quickly taken the mask off and was staring at his uncle in disbelief. Uncle Nick was speechless, his face drained of color. He rushed over to Dinky and pulled the dagger out of his costume. The others in the room, Mrs. Little, Mr. Little, and the children's Uncle Pete, all sat frozen in their seats, too shocked to move. Luckily, Granny and Grandpa Little were in the other room, playing with baby Betsy. They both might have had heart attacks. "Sweet jumpin' Jiminy in the morning, Nick. Have you gone completely mad?" shouted Uncle Pete. "You could have hurt Tom or Lucy. You could have killed Dinky." "I'm so sorry. I'm so terribly sorry," Uncle Nick said as he put his arm around Cousin Dinky's shoulder. He hugged Tom and Lucy and kept apologizing, and then he squeezed all of their arms and elbows to be sure that they were all still in one piece. Later, after everyone had calmed down, the family sat together in the Littles' living room. Dinky had taken off his costume. He was sitting on the sofa in his long johns, drinking a mug of very strong, very hot black coffee. "Once again, Dinky, I must apologize," Uncle Nick was saying. "We weren't expecting you, and certainly not all done up in a Halloween costume. After all, you're a grown man, and one doesn't expect that sort of thing from an adult." Uncle Pete chuckled. "Speaking of adults behaving in a strange manner, Nick, old fellow, I didn't know you still had it in you. Why, remember the days when there wasn't a mouse in the entire Big Valley that was safe with Major Nicholas T. Little. Your reflexes are very nearly everything they used to be." "Well, I'm glad they aren't everything they used to be," said Dinky as he took a sip of coffee, rubbed his throat, and looked in Uncle Nick's direction. "If he still had it in him, I might have had it in me." Major Nick Little started pacing up and down. As usual, he was dressed neatly in his major's uniform. "It's not all my fault, is it?" he said. "After all, mice and rats are no laughing matters to us older tinies. The great mouse invasion may be a grand old story to you younger folk, but he paused and waved his hands toward Uncle Pete, "we actually lived through those troubled times. Why do you think Pete here limps and walks with a cane? Because of an old hopscotch accident. Because of an old hopscotch accident? No. He came face to face with a set of sharp, cruel mouse teeth. I was there on that terrible day. Let me tell you, it's a miracle that he's even got 2 legs today. Uncle Nick took a breath. We fought side by side with a lot of good men. Some of them weren't lucky enough to live to tell the tale. Uncle Nick wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. As a major in the Mouse Brigade in Trash City, I saw things over the course of my 30-year service that would make your flesh melt right off your bones. His voice grew louder and his cheeks flushed red as he continued. And I didn't make a career out of protecting a lot of very good people from vicious vermin just to be the butt of some young people's foolish Halloween prank. Mrs. Little put her arm around Uncle Nick's shoulders. Please calm down, Nick, she said softly. It isn't like you to get so upset over something like this. Uncle Nick looked at her and sighed. I'm sorry, everyone. Something has been bothering me lately. It sounds foolish, I know, but this cold weather we've been having makes me nervous. This fall feels exactly like it did right before the great mouse invasion. He thought back to that fateful time. It was the brutal early cold spell that drove all of the mice indoors that year. I know this is only the end of October, but there's a feeling in the air that's just the same. Believe me, after so many years of paying attention to this sort of thing, one gets a nose for it. Uncle Nick pointed to a mouse war medal on his chest. And I didn't get this, or lose this. He pulled off his false tail and tossed it at Lucy. By not knowing my business, I don't pussyfoot around when it comes to mice. Lucy giggled. Ick, she squealed. She quickly picked up her uncle's false tail. She held it out as though it were a snake and tossed it back to him, laughing all the while. Say, Cousin Dinky, what's your great news? Tom asked his cousin. Dinky looked up from his coffee. Oh, how could I forget? That's the very reason I came. He put his coffee mug down. A few months ago, Della and I flew into the great woods to deliver your Thanksgiving invitation to your old tree tiny friend, Stubby Speck. We found him fishing for minnows along the bank of the creek. He must have had 5 fishing lines going at once. 5 lines? Holy smoke! Mr. Little whistled. How on earth did he manage that? After all, Stubby only has 2 arms. Well, Cousin Dinky explained, he had 3 poles stuck in the gooey muck by the side of the creek and 2 lines tied to each of his big toes. He was resting on a soft bed of thick green moss down by the water's edge, and he was leaning against his sidekick, Old Skunk. They were both snoring away like old pickup trucks with broken mufflers. Mr. Little laughed. Sounds just like Stubby. We woke Stubby up, Dinky said. You know, the old expression, it's best to let sleeping skunks lie. You're right there, said Uncle Pete. Anyway, Cousin Dinky went on, Stubby said the Speck family would be delighted to come here for Thanksgiving dinner. His wife and daughters have been dying to get out of the tree, and they're all excited to visit a real house. Like all tree tinies, the Specks lived in rooms inside a hollow tree trunk. Stubby suggested that they stay the entire week and have a good visit. We figured that would be fine, and we told him so. Dinky sipped his coffee and waited to see what Mrs. Little said. Maybe she would be angry that he and Della had invited the Specks to stay for such a long time. Thanksgiving week, what a wonderful idea, Mrs. Little smiled. That gives us plenty of time to get things ready. Dinky breathed a sigh of relief. The rest of the Littles were glad to have company, particularly Tom and Lucy. They were always excited to have a chance to play with other tiny children. Everyone began to talk at once. Granny and Grandpa Little came out of the room where baby Betsy's cradle was kept. What's all the hubbub about here? Asked Granny. We just got Betsy to fall asleep, and all this racket's sure to wake her up. She noticed suddenly that Uncle Dinky's sitting with the rest of the family. Dinky Little, goodness sakes alive. Nobody told me you were coming. She looked him up and down, and sitting there in your underwear. Why, it's disgraceful that a man of your age, and she suddenly let out a loud shriek and fainted dead away. Grandpa Little caught her before she fell to the ground. Granny had seen the river rat full head mask lying on the sofa next to Dinky. Grandpa Little stared at the rest of the family. He was very confused. Tom and Lucy Little looked at one another. Tom sighed and shrugged his shoulders. "Here we go again," he said. Lucy just shook her head. All right, so here is the picture of the children. Remember, they could climb all the pipes and they knew how to get around from one part of the apartment to another, and they had made some pulleys out of soup cans. And here is Cousin Dinky when he got nailed by Uncle's knife, and fortunately it just went through his outfit. It didn't hit him in the shoulder. So although it looks like it hurt him, it didn't hurt him. But there's the mouse's head that he was wearing that got him such a nice little trophy in the shoulder. And that is the end of chapter 2. And next time we will start chapter 3 of The Littles. And I hope you enjoyed it. This is Grandma Carla, and I love you.